of Nalgona Positivity Pride, a Chicana body positive eating disorders awareness organization. I live in Southern California, and I've been doing eating disorder activism and education for the past 6 years. So today I will be sharing information in correlation to eating disorders and maybe some topics our mothers never had a chance to talk to us about. So I will speak about a little bit about historical trauma and colonialism and the mental health effects of fat phobia, diet culture, and food restriction. So first off, I want to give some time for all of us to consider and think of what was our mother's relationship with food growing up and currently, right? So was there food insecurity? Was there food abundance? Was there a healthy relationship with food? Were there cultural ties and resiliency, food stories? What is that story of our mother regarding food? When I think about that question for myself, I, for the longest time, it didn't quite settle in for me how I am daughter of a woman that faced extreme food insecurity. My mother tells me how she would pick up orange peelings and gum from the floor and eat that for her food. And that at times she was so hungry, her stomach would hurt. And so in considering those hardships, that made me question, how has that impacted me today? And the fact that I am a person that struggles with an eating disorder, has my mother's experiences trickled down to my own relationship with food? And so the past 6 years, I've been working hard on looking at the connections between eating disorders and social justice. And what I've learned is that eating disorders partly stem from past and current trauma, food restriction, and food deprivation. And many times with diet culture teaching us, you have to restrict with food in means of losing weight, and then you'll be worthy, then you'll be healthy, then you'll be valuable. And many times dieting does not work. As a matter of fact, it has a 95% failure rate. And people blame themselves for not being able to fulfill the goals of their weight loss. But if we look at this vicious cycle of food restriction, dieting, we see that first of all, it starts maybe with fat phobia, internalized weight stigma, then that leads to dieting or food restriction. This increases hunger. Then the person eats forbidden food and potentially eats to the point of discomfort. This leads to shame, therefore stress in the body, and then increased fat phobia, and then the cycle goes on and on. I mean, never in history has there been a time where people intended to lose weight. So this is somewhat of a new phenomenon. And so dieting is harmful. Looking at the Minnesota starvation experiments, this was a landmark study back in World War II, where about 36 young men were part of this study to further examine the effects of starvation to help guide relief efforts among famished populations in Asia and Europe. Now, the study did not necessarily do a lot at that time. It did a lot of harm. But now that study informs the treatment of eating disorders and highlights the consequences of diet cycling. So the study began with 3 months of normal eating. And the next part of the study was 6 months of semi-starvation, designed to reduce each participant's body weight by 25%. In the first few weeks of reducing calorie intake, moods dropped, In the following weeks, 2 men went to the psychiatric ward. They exhibited psychotic symptoms. Another actually chopped off his finger with an axe. And tired, feeling foggy, they had difficulty concentrating, they began to withdraw, socialize less, and their focus shifted to the plates in front of them. Their libido dropped, and instead of having dreams on other pleasurable subjects, all their dreams became about food. Most of the dreams became about food, and some of them had nightmares of cannibalism. And so this caused a lot of impaired mental performance. And another said he blacked out and went to the grocery store. And when he woke up, he was shoving stolen food and eating it. And so these men who had previously were healthy, had no mental health issues overall, and had no concerns about their body image, suddenly began to experience body image disturbances. Even though they had lost weight, they still felt that they weren't underweight. And so these participants started exhibiting behavior of those persecuted and starving abroad without actually being persecuted and truly starved, right? Because they were experiencing semi-starvation. And so following the study, it changed drastically the behaviors these men had with food for years to come. So we know that restriction, whether it's from dieting or food scarcity, can lead to behaviors affecting mental health. And for many people, eating disorders are a result of unresolved grief, a reaction to compacted traumas. If we come from the indigenous diaspora of what is now considered North America, Central America, and South America, we know that generations back, they experienced unspeakable violence. We're talking about coercive assimilation. We're talking about biological warfare, military conquest, forced relocations, sexual exploitation, and the list goes on. Now, even though it's not really talked about, the effects of the legacies of historical violence are still felt today by the descendants, not to mention that a lot of this social inequities haven't stopped, obviously. And so historical trauma calls to the cumulative and emotional wounding over lifespan and being spread across generations. And so the symptoms or the signs of historical trauma include depression, self-destructive behaviors, psychic numbing, anger, identification with the dead, and reenacting affliction within one's own life. So continuously drawing in that stress, that chaos, that harm in one's life. And all of these, in one way or the other, connect with eating disorders. So we have the mental health component, and also socially, right? The legacies of colonialism have informed people of color, Black people, as well as Indigenous people, that our bodies are dirty. And many of these messagings, sometimes it's outright explicitly, and other times it's very settled. But nonetheless, it shows up when we look at ourselves in the mirror. So some of the messages due to colonialism and historical violence inform us that our bodies are dirty, sinful, hypersexualized, if not completely have no ties to sexuality. And this serves to dehumanize, particularly women of color. We're seen as incomplete. We might see ourselves as disposable, submissive, unintelligent, dehumanized, unattractive, and undesired. And our bodies are seen as those that can endure extreme physical labor due to the legacies of slavery. And so when we look at ourselves in the mirror, it is political. It's not an individualistic single experience. It is collective. So some of us are carrying our mothers' and grandmothers' grief. And the way they were able to survive was by adopting dysfunctional coping ways. And this has been passed down to us. And in some ways, this shows the amongst ourselves and our ancestors. And if we think about it, if our mothers never talked to us about all of this, on top of instilling self-love, it might be in part due to sexism, due to the fact that, nobody really invested on our mothers while they were growing up or honored them and celebrated them. So how many times mothers can't teach us what they have never known or experienced. So fatphobia, the fear of fatness and the discrimination towards fat people, also has mental health effects that are detrimental for people's overall health. But first off, we have to look at where fatphobia stems from. Fatphobia has anti-Black roots. So there are two historical developments that led to the preference of thinness. First off, it was the rise of the transatlantic slave trade, and two, the spread of Protestantism. And so during this time, the phobia about fatness became about this fear of an imagined fat Black woman. And this was created by racial and religious ideologies that have been used to both degrade Black women and discipline white women. And so elites and higher class people are always looking for ways to distinguish themselves from subordinated groups. So they distinguish different styles and cultivate different diets and tastes as a way to normalize social hierarchies of who is better than the other. And this is how fatphobia came to be. Because if we think about it, when we look at more stocky bodies, many times it is people of color, right? So, and Europeans came from much more thin and slender figures. And so anything that was an opposite to whiteness and thinness became othered. And so what have been the effects of this for our mental health are a lot. We all know fat people in this country do not get treated very poorly, systemically and with interpersonal relationships. For instance, healthcare providers spend less time with their fat patients. Thin people get paid more than fat peers. It's more difficult to get hired, and so on. And so some research tells us that struggles with depression and body image were found to be higher among people seeking weight loss, bariatric surgery, and binge eating disorder. And stigma-induced stress contributes to higher rates of substance use and anxiety and mood disorders. Internalized weight stigma was associated with increased body image concerns, disassociation, and food preoccupation. And over half of the people who experienced weight stigma also qualified as having at least one psychiatric disorder. And so how we conceptualize our bodies and the degree to which we internalize fatphobic messages that saturates our world is bigger predictors of low self-esteem, no matter our size, right? So even for people not living in larger bodies, this threat of potentially being bigger in a bigger body and experiencing social rejection is also affecting our mental health. And so we need to actively challenge fatphobia rather than to blame individuals, move away from the model of shame, and integrate a weight inclusive approach. We have to fight diet culture, food insecurity, and support food justice in a way that it's friendly to people and this is only part, right, of the ways that we could prevent eating disorders and improve mental health statuses of people. And if there's anything that I've learned as an individual that struggles with an eating disorder, is that any weight change, the struggle is still there, right? And we're learning from these studies that it's a lot deeper, these issues, and it goes beyond, you know, I don't like how I look, right? There's the system involved that tells us every single day how we are unfit. And so moralizing health is not helpful for our mental health, right? And it's also ableist. And so food choices, our diet, and not to mention that it's anti-poor, because not everybody has access to these particular foods that are deemed more valuable and healthy, quote unquote. And if you're struggling with body image or eating disorders, just know that you are not a failure. We do live in a country that, first of all, helped establish international fatphobia. So everything that we experience is true and real. And if you're struggling with an eating disorder, you've gone through some stuff. So the best thing one can do is be compassionate and understanding, and know that healing from this and improving our love to oneself is a continuum. It's a journey. And what I have learned is that if I heal myself, I also heal my mother. And an indigenous teaching is that if you also heal yourself right now, you heal 7 generations forward. So for a lot of us that consider ourselves ancestors in training, this has been part of what helps us with our mental health, right? Is seeing the bigger picture and knowing that we can get to a better place while being realistic of the social pressures, of course. So a question for all of us to ask is, what wound am I healing in my life? Or what wound would I like to heal? How can you help heal your mother's and grandmother's wounds to not repeat cycles? And how can you help change the narrative for future generations? And I'm deeply motivated to see all this activism taking place within fat community, within the body positive world. And I truly believe that this is a generation that is changing things so that our upcoming youth are less likely to struggle with eating disorders and so forth. And I wanted to share this resource that might be of value to you. This is our online peer support group for people of color, Black and Indigenous people as well, who struggle with eating disorders. It is completely free, it's all virtual, and it is anonymous. And it's one of the very few support groups that are specific to POC. And closed groups are important because we talked about weight stigma and fat phobia, but then adding class, adding race, just makes these experiences more unique. And so we need these safe spaces to feel understood and feel in community to bring forward the healing. So we talked about the effects of dieting and also what semi-starvation has brought forward, because dieting in many ways is eating less than what we're used to and leading to semi-starvation, and how not only it affects our health, but also our mental health, the roots of fat phobia, dealing with racism, of course, and more importantly, maybe even be more compassionate towards our mother's experiences with food, even if they didn't instill body love or encourage us to improve or be good with, in good terms with our bodies. We understand that our role now is to change that and to heal ourselves so that we heal the upcoming generations. So that was my presentation. Now I wanted to share a little bit of what is currently taking place, the political uprisings, Black Lives Matter, COVID, and what that has meant for a lot of people like myself, right, who are doing eating disorder activism, and also people impacted by eating disorders. And of course, like most other people, this has brought an awakening, brought forward a lot of community building. And, at the very beginning of this, it was very beautiful to see the eating disorder world come together and build these grassroots models of support for people with eating disorders. On Instagram alone, there was a account, is COVID-19 eating disorder support, in which every hour there was a provider just giving support every hour, 24 hours, 7 days a week for people worldwide. And I mean, this is a model making support and treatment accessible. Also, what I noticed with my work is that people are very interested on harm reduction due to the fact that people are now in quarantine and having to be home, and the food is right there, or maybe the lack of food is right there. This has, made people curious about harm reduction, and it's some of the work that I do. So the harm reduction model is usually being used for people who use substances and for alcohol. And harm reduction is about not condemning the risky behavior, but rather looking at everything else around it to support individuals struggling with substance use. Now, when it comes to eating disorders, eating disorder harm reduction are compassionate, accessible strategies in which a person who is engaging with the risky behavior of an eating disorder can prevent further harm in their bodies, and also introduce them to self-care. And recovery, as well as eating disorder harm reduction, they're not in opposition, they go hand in hand. And so learning about different ways in which people take care of themselves while they're in the struggle has helped break stigma, has helped build community, and also allow people to be honest with themselves, right? That there could be amazing, magnificent, powerful, resilient people and also be struggling, right? You don't have to just go into this self-destructive mode, right? You could show up to the table as you are. And that's what's very powerful about harm reduction, is that it started in community and it has really freed people up and helped reduce the stigma that isolates people. And if there's anything we know about eating disorders, is that they thrive in isolation. And so harm reduction has allowed people to have these honest conversations and be compassionate with oneself. And so maybe looking at these models might be helpful for people who are struggling, and just talking to other people who are like-minded and building support. Through COVID, it actually slowed me down. Obviously slowed down everybody, but it slowed me down in the way that I needed it to slow me down. And now I've been in one place for a very long time, and it's helped me evaluate my life and rekindle relationships. One of the beautiful things that COVID has brought is just building stronger friendships with people. And that has transformed my life and has helped me as I struggle with an eating disorder. And just seeing the online community also, grow, especially within the body positive movement. And so if you yourself are struggling, I highly encourage you to go online. There's tons of Facebook groups who are, focusing on weight inclusive health models that do not shame individuals for being in larger bodies, or weight loss is not the focus, because we know it doesn't really work. just creates this vicious cycle, and yo-yo dieting is worse than maintaining a, a weight. And so finding these communities might be helpful. And maybe they're not in your town, and they might be all online, but you know, the body positive online community, I believe, has saved my life. And there's tons of, you come from a marginalized background, more and more there are folks doing this line of work. And so I hope these are ways in which can also help you through these strange times.